byproducts. Gunshot residue is discharged from every opening of the gun. So the main one that you would think about would be the muzzle, okay, the opening or the end of the barrel. But this can come out of any spot um, in this back area near the breech end or the action also, where there's an opening. And so often you're going to get it on the hands, the face, the shirt, the surrounding area. So gunshot residue is going to coat the shooter's hands, their clothing, their body, and if they're close enough, the victim. Some things that you're going to look for in that gunshot residue would be lead, antimony, and barium. Um, these are common components of things that are in gunshot residue. How can you also look at this in a little bit more detail? An electron microscope can look at the residue particles and see that there are different shapes. So these are actually different particles of gunshot residue. They're going to help determine the powder that was used in the original ammunition. When a firearm is discharged, that gunshot residue is propelled out of the barrel at a distance of about up to 10 feet. And it can be detected on a surface along its path. So you could be in contact with it. As you go farther and farther back, it's going to spread out more. You're going to get less of it on the target, but it's traveling along this path. So that's going to settle to the ground also or be dispersed through the air currents or wind of wherever you're at. And you're going to get different patterns based on closeness to the target that you are shooting. So as gunshot residue moves away from the muzzle, it tends to spread out. How much that does is determined by a series of firing test shots. So if you have the gun, you can go right up to a target and shoot, and then reset the target, back up a distance, shoot again, and do all these different tests at different distances, and then compare those patterns to what was found at the crime scene. So that can help you know the muzzle to target distance. And you can estimate that a little bit by the pattern that's created by that gunshot residue. So here are some different standards of different distances. So these were all fired at different distances. You can chemically identify it through a series of different tests. So this is one of the reasons that you might see at a crime scene. They might actually put bags sometimes over the hands of um, the victim, and that's going to prevent gun residue from being lost, but also from contamination. You can test for these at the scene, but a lot of times they're going to get back to the autopsy table and do some testing there, not just underneath the fingernails for things like DNA or scrapes and things, but gunshot residue. It's a common practice for criminals to try to scrape off the serial number that is on the gun. So when guns are manufactured and stamped, they get unique serial numbers, and that allows them to be registered and for police to trace them back to their original owners. Now, obviously, criminals don't always follow the law, and so they may have unregistered weapons, but what they might want to do is try to tamper with it. And so a lot of times they'll scrape it off or grind it off. What a lot of them don't realize is you can restore that number. Scraping it off does not permanently remove it. So, why is that? The numbers often are stamped onto the metal. So, you've got this hard metal, and then they press them under great pressure. So, at a microscopic level, the crystal structure of the metal is distorted and stressed permanently. And that's stressed deep into the metal, well below the surface. So, when you grind off that serial number or scrape it off, yes, definitely you have distorted this number. But deep underneath that, in the metal itself, that serial number is still there at a microscopic level. So it's possible to restore those in some ways. One of them is actually to use hydrochloric acid or another acid. And what it does is it um, erodes away the softer metal, but leaves the harder metal in place longer. And so what it's doing is it's leaving behind that compressed area where that number is, and it'll come into view as you dissolve the metal around it. Another way is to look at it under a scanning electron microscope and actually look at the shape that's there. So this was a number that was fully scratched off, and then using a technique, we can clearly see that it's been restored and we can see it. And that is what we're going to cover for that. We're about to get into impression evidence in general. So this is going to include firearms, but now we're going to start to talk about other things like tire marks, bite marks, and tool marks. And so that will be a different video.